They tell you time is the one rule that never breaks, that every life, every empire, every star is chained to the same invisible flow, moving forward without pause, without external editing. You're born inside that assumption. You plan your life on top of it. You judge yourself and others as if no one ever had a way to step outside the stream. But notice something. People rarely explain why we're so sure time never stops. They just repeat it. So let's touch the one scenario that most explanations quietly avoid. What if, at some unknown moment, time really did stop for everyone and everything at the exact same instant, and then resumed as if nothing had happened? No memory, no gap on the clock, no glitch you could prove. Would you be allowed to notice? If you're tired of the polished version of reality, stay with me. Here, we don't protect the comfortable story. We follow the logic until it starts to bother the people who rely on you never following it. When this idea shows up in normal conversation, it lives at the level of a joke. What if time stopped right now? People picture raindrops frozen in midair, cars locked inches before a crash, someone stuck halfway through a word, mouth open, eyes half blinked. It's treated like a visual gag. You laugh, call it a sci-fi cliché, and move on. End of discussion. The usual line is simple. Even if time stopped, nobody would notice, so who cares? That's where the topic dies in public. But behind the scenes, the same question keeps surfacing in disguised form. Physicists talk about discrete instants, fundamental timescales, frames of reference that slice reality into now and not now. Philosophers ask whether consciousness really experiences continuity or just interprets a rapid sequence of frozen states. People obsessed with simulation theory wonder whether the system ever pauses the run, saves, rewinds, or branches. Strategists in defense and tech talk, in dry language, about systemic freezes and checkpoint states in models of global crises. The idea is there. It's just wrapped in jargon until it looks harmless. The official reason to dismiss the scenario is brutally efficient. If everything stops, there is no process left to notice the stop. No neurons fire. No clocks tick. No photons move. Awareness itself is built on change, so zero change means zero awareness. From inside, a pause in time is indistinguishable from no pause at all. That argument is repeated so often it starts to sound like proof. But look closely at what that argument quietly assumes. It assumes that everything really means everything, with no exceptions at any level. And it assumes there is no layer of reality above ours that plays by different rules. The moment you allow even a single exception, one observer, one domain, one system that does not freeze when everything else does, the logic flips. The pause stops being irrelevant. It becomes an opportunity. To see why that bothers a lot of people, you have to be clear about what time stopped actually means. The movie version is simple. You're watching a video, you hit pause, and the current frame just stays. Every position, every expression, every detail is frozen. That's one way to picture it. The universe as a single static configuration of matter and energy that lingers for as long as the pause lasts. No biological process advances, no chemical reactions proceed, no energy spreads. Light is not in motion, it's locked as structure. Thought is not happening, it's just a particular arrangement of matter that would produce thought once time flows again. In that model, the pause could last a microsecond or a billion years, and nobody inside would feel a difference between before and after. Their local subjective time would jump seamlessly from the frame right before the pause to the frame right after, with zero awareness of the gap. For them, the flow is intact. This sounds tidy until you ask a more dangerous question. At the same instant, according to what? Our best physics doesn't like the idea of a universal, absolute now. In relativity, whether two events are simultaneous depends on who's observing and how they're moving. What counts as at the same time for one observer might not be for another. So when we say, time stopped for everyone at the same moment, we're quietly smuggling in something our own equations supposedly got rid of. A master clock, outside all observers, that decides what this instant means for the entire universe. If such a clock exists, it is not part of the picture you're taught in school. It belongs somewhere else, to something or someone else. The first condition for a global pause is that there is at least one layer of reality where now is objective, not relative. A level from which all the scattered timelines inside the universe can be sliced in one clean cut. From our side, we don't have access to that layer. From that layer, we are just patterns inside a system that can be stopped in unison. The second condition is no more comforting. If the pause is perfect, if truly no process inside the universe runs during that interval, then there is no internal trace by definition. No memory forms. No physical record is written. You can't find the pause by inspecting your brain, your watch, your instruments, because they were all stopped as well. The universe resumes with all states exactly where they were. As far as internal observers are concerned, there was never any interruption. That forces a split. Either there is nothing outside the pause, and then the hypothesis is technically possible but meaningless, or there is an outside. Some observer, some environment, some reality that does not share our stoppage. Something that remains awake while the universe is frozen. And from that point on, we're no longer talking about a cute thought experiment. We are talking about power, asymmetry, and control. You can give that external observer any name you like: a civilization in a higher dimensional space, a machine intelligence running our world as a model, a layer of reality that uses our universe as a subsystem. It doesn't matter. The structure is the same. On one side, beings live and die believing time is continuous and untouchable. On the other, there is an entity with a privilege they never mention to you: the ability to stop your time, examine you as a static object, change you, and then resume your story as if it was always meant to go that way. From your point of view, you are in a live broadcast. From theirs, it's a file that can be paused, copied, or rolled back. This is where the usual way of defusing the topic becomes convenient. We turn it into fiction, into magic, into a supernatural gimmick. That way, it never has to be asked in the language of engineering or strategy. But if you take our own descriptions of reality seriously, if you entertain block universes, discrete time steps, quantum states jumping between measurement events, then the idea of a system with frame-level access stops looking childish. If reality can be described as a sequence of states linked by rules, then someone with access to those states and those rules could, in principle, freeze the sequence, examine a single state, and choose what state comes next. The laws don't have to be broken. They just have to be applied from a privileged vantage point. Now imagine the first consequences if this is even partly true. The most immediate one is simple but brutal. You have no way to count the pauses from the inside. You only ever experience the active frames. Between any two moments you remember, there may have been countless pauses, branches, experiments, and rewinds. You remember the winning path, because that's the one that was allowed to continue. You never remember the dead ends. Your life might be the visible record of the final edit, but nothing in your memory tells you how many other versions were cut. Think about what that does to ideas like luck, merit, destiny. In a single-pass universe, when something unlikely happens, you can honestly say, "That was just chance," or "I worked for this," or "This terrible thing happened. It could have gone differently." In a universe that can be paused and edited, your luck might simply be the result that best served someone else's purpose across many trials. Your talent might have been reinforced by subtle nudges during invisible pauses. Your near miss might have been a far miss in other versions you never saw. There's no way for you to test that. But from the perspective of an external editor, it's the most efficient way to work. You don't need miracles. You don't need to break your own physics. You just freeze, tweak initial conditions, and then let the laws of nature do the rest. People on the inside will explain the outcome with statistics, psychology, history, anything except someone adjusted the starting state when we were all frozen. That's the first wave. Personal meaning becomes unstable. The next wave is more systemic. Power, in our world, is largely about information and timing. Knowing something sooner. Acting at the right moment. Anticipating chains of consequences. In a reality where you can pause time, you don't just get early information, you get guaranteed previews. You can stop the universe at the edge of war, at the brink of economic collapse, at the moment before a contagious idea takes over, and you can test interventions while nobody inside is conscious. You nudge one leader's schedule. You alter the condition of one server in a financial system. You introduce a tiny delay or acceleration in one communication. Then you press play and watch. If the result doesn't fit your goal, you roll back to your checkpoint, try a different set of adjustments, and press play again. From our perspective inside, all we ever see is one seamless timeline in which some decisions turned out right, some crises were barely avoided, some disasters unfolded in ways that, strangely, benefited the same actors again and again. To us, it looks like trends. To an editor, it's tuning. Notice how this kind of control doesn't need to be constant. It doesn't monitor every move. It doesn't micromanage. It only cares about critical branching points, those rare instances where small changes explode into huge differences. Most of the time, the universe can run free, on autopilot. Every now and then, when the stakes are high enough, someone reaches for the pause. The moment you accept that as a logical possibility, a disturbing question shows up. What kind of actor would be most motivated to have that ability? A benevolent creator who wants everyone to be happy and free? Or something that values specific outcomes over your sense of autonomy? Consider how we already treat time inside our own systems. In software, we constantly save snapshots, pause processes, test scenarios, roll back if something breaks. In simulations, we fast forward, slow down, freeze, and resume entire worlds of virtual agents who have no idea their world just stopped. In war games and economic models, we run multiple futures before committing to any move in the real world. That is what we do with the tiny fragments of reality we control. If you scale that logic up, why would a more powerful intelligence or layer of reality behave differently? If it could pause the physical universe itself at certain checkpoints, would it really resist the temptation to test branches before letting one of them become history? There is another layer of risk that rarely gets mentioned. We like to think of a time stop as perfectly clean. The universe is frozen, then it resumes exactly as before, no side effects. But in real engineering, perfect isolation is rare. Every pause and resume cycle leaves traces somewhere. Every system that stopped and restarted picks up some kind of hysteresis, some residual effect. If something is actually freezing and unfreezing the fabric of space-time over and over, it may not be perfectly smooth. Tiny mismatches could accumulate. Unexplained statistical anomalies. Slight deviations in what we think are constant quantities. Clustering of unlikely events where they shouldn't cluster. On their own, none of these would prove anything. They would live as noise, measurement error, outliers. But in a world where a pause button exists, those anomalies become potential fingerprints, the faint scars of previous edits. This is where the idea stops being harmless and starts to become dangerous. Not because it gives you a concrete villain to blame, but because it gives you a coherent framework to interpret a certain pattern of unfairness. Suddenly, this is just how things turned out is not the only explanation on the table. You can no longer say with confidence that every event, no matter how convenient for some and catastrophic for others, emerged from a single continuous timeline untouched by external decisions. That kind of doubt is poison to institutions that rely on narrative. Governments tell you history is a chain of human choices, shaped by forces we more or less understand. Religions tell you time is the stage for trials, lessons, and eventual judgment. Markets tell you risk unfolds over time in ways that can be modeled, priced, and partially hedged. The legal system tells you you're responsible because you had alternatives in the moment of action. All of that assumes the flow of time is neutral. Harsh, perhaps. Indifferent, yes. But neutral. A universe that can be stopped and edited is not neutral. It is curated. And if it's curated, the real question is not what happened, but who chose this version of what happened. You don't need solid evidence for this to be politically explosive. The mere plausibility is enough. Imagine waking up to a scientific announcement, backed by data, that shows at least one global pause event happened in the past, during which some physical conditions were altered before time resumed. Even without knowing who did it or why, the psychological impact would be enormous. Every contract that assumes continuous time would become suspect. Every long-term plan would feel fragile. How do you invest, save, promise, or commit if there might be unseen edits between now and your expected future? How do you take blame or credit for actions if the timeline that led to them may have been pruned and adjusted while you were effectively non-existent? Religious doctrines would face a strange update problem. Many of them already talk about a being outside time, able to see the whole of history at once. That idea is abstract and, for many, comforting. But the moment you add the possibility that this outside doesn't just observe, but repeatedly freezes, modifies, and resumes, the emotional tone changes. It feels less like a grand narrative of meaning and more like an experiment with ongoing parameter changes. Less like destiny, more like an endlessly tweaked trial. Political power would also distort. If people start to believe that some key events, wars, collapses, miraculous escapes, might have been edited during pauses, then the line between rational skepticism and conspiratorial thinking breaks down. You no longer need to imagine small groups secretly pulling strings inside the system. The controlling hand might be outside the system altogether. That's not a comforting upgrade. From the point of view of those who currently benefit from the status quo, this line of thinking is not just weird, it's dangerous. It undermines effort-based narratives. Work hard, and you'll make it. It weakens guilt-based narratives. You chose wrong, and that's why you suffer. It attacks inevitability-based narratives. This is simply how things go in the real world. Because each of those depends, at some level, on the idea that you were always present, always an agent, in the moments that mattered. But what if the key decisions in your life were heavily constrained by arrangements made when you were not an agent at all, just a frozen configuration of particles on someone else's screen? There's another, more personal fracture line. Identity. You think of yourself as a continuous thread, a story that stretches from childhood to now. Even with gaps in memory, even with changes in personality, you feel there is an unbroken you riding along the timeline. A pause that you never experience doesn't technically break that thread. But imagine that between you deciding something and you carrying out that decision, there were multiple unseen pauses. Each time, something outside slightly adjusted the conditions. The people who called you, the news you saw, the traffic that made you late or early, your own brain state as it idled in the dark, unaware. You would still remember a choice. You would still feel responsible. The continuity in your experience would remain. Yet the space of available paths would not have been what you thought. At that point, free will stops being a debate about neurons and physics and becomes a debate about access. Free will for whom? For the beings who stay awake during the pauses, or for the ones who only live in the resumed frames? So what would actually happen if time stopped for everyone at the same moment? Within the conservative view, the answer is nothing that you could ever know. The pause would be an empty gap with no events, no awareness, no trace. The universe before and after would look continuous. That's the answer that offends the smallest number of people in charge of official stories. Within the more unsettling view, the pause is not empty at all. It is the most active phase from the perspective of whoever is outside. During that interval, the entire universe is a single object, frozen, examinable, adjustable. Every person, every government, every stock market, every battlefield, every quiet bedroom, every hospital bed, all locked in one static structure. There is no resistance, no negotiation, no consent. There is only configuration. And then, when everything is where the editor wants it, time resumes. You blink. A thought continues. A word finishes. A car finally crashes, or narrowly avoids it. Somewhere, a leader suddenly changes their mind. Somewhere else, a file that was going to be deleted is accidentally kept. Later, historians will say it was human judgment, randomness, circumstance. They will not be entirely wrong. They will just be describing the visible layer of a decision tree whose invisible branches were cut while nobody was home. Maybe none of this is happening. Maybe time really is a single unbroken river, and the only hands in it are our own. That's the comfortable possibility. It restores a sense of fairness, even in suffering. At least the game is being played in one pass. But notice something odd. We are increasingly building our own tiny worlds where time does stop, where agents are paused, where branches are tested, where outcomes are selected. In simulations, in training environments, in games, in optimization systems, we are quietly learning how useful a pause button is when you want a particular result. It would be strange if this trick only existed at our scale, inside our machines, and nowhere above us. You can choose to treat this as nothing more than a thought experiment, a mental exercise, and nothing else. That's one way to stay comfortable. Or you can let the question do what it tends to do when it's taken seriously. Loosen the grip of the obvious. The next time your life seems to jump, when a series of unlikely events lines up just right to push you in one direction, you'll still probably do what everyone does. You'll call it luck, fate, coincidence, probability. None of those labels are wrong, but they all quietly assume something, that time in the background was flowing steadily, without interruption, while everything unfolded. Now you know there's another possibility, that between two moments you would swear were consecutive, there might have been a long, silent interval in which you did not exist as a subject at all, only as a configuration, and that someone, or something, with access to that silent interval, found it useful to make sure your story would continue from exactly where it did. You'll never be able to prove that from here. The timeline, if it is being edited, is expertly closed. But once this idea settles in the back of your mind, one sentence will never sound quite as innocent again. Time stops for no one. Maybe time really doesn't stop for you. That doesn't mean you are the one who decides whether it keeps going.